Trump announces breakthrough deals, a ceasefire between Pakistan and India, and a trade deal with China.
It's important to understand how quickly we were able to come to agreement, which reflects that perhaps the differences were not so large as maybe thought.
I'm Daily Wire Executive Editor John Bickley with Georgia Howe. It's Monday, May 12th, and this is Morning Wire.
The Trump administration is turning up the heat on anyone obstructing immigration officials after a Democrat mayor is arrested in New Jersey.
There is a problem in this country with breaking the law for the purpose of grandstanding and political hierarchy. That will not stand in my state. That will not stand in this country.
And Trump picks a major MAHA figure as Surgeon General. What do we know about the nominee and her mission?
I learned virtually nothing at Stanford Medical School about the tens of thousands of scientific papers that elucidate these root causes of why American health is plummeting.
Thanks for waking up with Morning Wire. Stay tuned. We have the news you need to know.
Introducing Beam's Dream Powder. It's a healthy nighttime blend packed with science-backed ingredients shown to improve sleep so you can wake up refreshed. Dream is made with powerful all-natural ingredients reishi, magnesium, L-theanine, apigenin, and melatonin. Beam is giving our listeners the ultimate Patriot discount of up to 40% off. Try their best-selling Dream Powder and get up to 40% off for a limited time. Head over to shopbeam.com/wire and use code WIRE at checkout. That's shopbeam.com/wire and use code WIRE for up to 40% off. Sleep better, wake up stronger, and show up ready for your family, your work, and your country.
After days of deadly fighting and rising global tensions, the United States has brokered a ceasefire between India and Pakistan and is also set to announce a major trade deal with China.
Daily Wire's senior editor Cabot Phillips has the latest. Hey, Cabot. So we'll get to this big trade deal in a second, but first, a really tense weekend that had the world kind of on edge. Then there was a breakthrough. Walk us through the India-Pakistan situation.
Yeah, it's important to remember the context here. India and Pakistan are bitter rivals. For decades, the two have feuded over religion, border disputes, and politics. Their shared border has been a tinderbox, and last week, a terror attack by Pakistani Islamists sparked the most significant conflict between the two countries that we've seen in decades. India responded with air and missile strikes on what they called terrorist camps, but a number of civilians were reportedly killed and 2 mosques were hit in those strikes. Pakistan responded with strikes of their own, and within 48 hours, the two sides, both of which, remember, are nuclear powers, were deploying kamikaze drones, fighter jets, and even conventional artillery. They were targeting each other's air defense systems, but again, a number of civilians were killed in that back and forth. Yeah. By Friday, both sides had begun to evacuate towns along the border. Dozens of airports and schools were shut down, and thousands of troops were mobilized on both sides towards the border. So it looked like an all-out war was imminent.
Right, an alarming escalation for sure. But now we're learning that the U.S. stepped in, correct?
Right. From the very start of this conflict, the Trump administration gave the impression that they had no interest in getting involved. At least publicly, they were saying that. Here's Vice President Vance, for example, on Fox News, saying the conflict was, quote, none of our business.
What we can do is try to encourage these folks to de-escalate a little bit, but we're not going to get involved in the middle of a war that's fundamentally none of our business and has nothing to do with America's ability to control it.
But while Vance was downplaying America's concern over the situation, we now know that he and Secretary of State Marco Rubio were working feverishly behind the scenes to iron out a peace deal. They were speaking directly with the country's 2 prime ministers and other high-ranking military officials. And on Saturday, President Trump really stunned the world by announcing that the U.S. had brokered a ceasefire between India and Pakistan. Writing on Truth Social, he said, quote, after a long night of talks mediated by the U.S., I'm pleased to announce that India and Pakistan have agreed to a full and immediate ceasefire. Congratulations to both countries on using common sense and great intelligence. Now, for their part, India initially refused to acknowledge America's role in the deal, but Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif removed any doubt, saying, quote, we thank President Trump for his leadership and proactive role for peace in the region. Pakistan appreciates the United States for facilitating this outcome. He went on to thank VP Vance and Secretary Rubio specifically for their, quote, valuable contributions for peace. Now, it's worth noting there were reports of small skirmishes still taking place along the border a couple times over the weekend. But for now, both sides are saying the ceasefire is holding. A lot of people still holding their breath, though.
So behind the scenes deal making by the Trump team, what led up to this deal?
Well, first, there was overwhelming global pressure on these two countries. The U.S., China, and Russia, who never really agree on anything, all sent out similar messages calling for peace. That obviously played a role, but ultimately it was the U.S. who played the biggest part. We don't yet know what the Trump administration may have offered the two sides, but there's a good chance it involved economic incentives. In fact, Trump signaled as much on Truth Social afterward. India has been pushing the White House to lower tariffs for weeks now, so don't be surprised if it comes out later that their willingness to sign onto a ceasefire had something to do with potential promises on tariffs.
Speaking of a trade deal, we have a potential major one between the U.S. and China that came through. What came out of Scott Bessent's negotiations in Switzerland?
Yeah, this could be the granddaddy of them all for trade deals. On Saturday and Sunday, the Treasury Secretary and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer met with a Chinese delegation in Switzerland for formal trade talks. The two sides were tight-lipped on the specifics, but according to Bessent, they made, quote, substantial progress. And according to President Trump, a deal was agreed on. Here's Greer from Geneva.
There was a lot of groundwork that went into these 2 days. Just remember why we're here in the first place is the United States has a massive $1.2 trillion trade deficit. So the president declared a national emergency and imposed tariffs. And we're confident that the deal we struck with our Chinese partners will help us to work toward resolving that national emergency.
Keep an eye out. The White House says we will get the details of that deal this morning, which will likely be music to the ears of Wall Street.
Yeah, no doubt. We'll see how the markets respond in short order. Cabot, thanks so much for reporting.
Absolutely.
Federal authorities arrested Newark Mayor Ross Baraka outside of an immigration detention facility on Friday. The Trump administration has threatened to arrest and charge even more Democrats who intervene in immigration enforcement.
Daily Wire reporter Tim Pierce is here to talk about Friday's arrest and the pressure campaign against Trump's immigration policy. Hey, Tim. So let's start with the mayor. Why exactly did he get arrested?
According to authorities, he was trespassing. He was charged on Friday after he joined a protest at an ICE facility in Newark. Federal authorities say Baraka entered the compound's gates and refused multiple directives to leave. Here's acting New Jersey U.S. Attorney Alina Habba on Fox News.
We will not stand for anybody getting in the way of getting rid of criminals in this country. It's very simple. Unfortunately, the mayor has publicly for 3 days been saying that he's going to break in, eventually did break in, was given multiple opportunities to remove himself, failed to do so, and has been detained and will be charged.
I should note that Baraka is also a candidate for New Jersey governor, so he has high aspirations. 3 Democratic Congress members were there as well. They said they were there to tour the facility in line with their oversight function. One of those members, Robert Menendez Jr. of New Jersey, said this about Baraka's arrest.
It was an act of intimidation. It was an act of intimidation not just to the mayor, not just to us, but to everyone watching.
Federal authorities say that more charges could be brought against those members of Congress as well.
So what actually took place? What happened at this detention center?
Well, there are mixed accounts. Here's Homeland Security spokeswoman Tricia McLaughlin on CNN.
What happened that these members of Congress, including the mayor as well, and a mob of protesters, as there was a bus full of detainees going through the gate, they stormed the gate and actually entered the first security checkpoint. This put law enforcement at risk, and this actually put the detainees as well at risk. If any official, including these members of Congress, want to enter the facility and take a tour, DHS is more than accommodating, but just because you're a member of Congress does not mean you can break the law, trespass, put law enforcement at risk, and storm the detention facility.
Congresswoman Bonnie Watson-Coleman, who was there with Menendez, said DHS lied about what happened. She claims the Congress members went into the detention center and then came out to talk with Baraka. After that, a scuffle broke out between federal authorities and the protesters. Here's some video of that. So a pretty messy scene.
Yeah, and the protest was over the Trump administration's deportation agenda. There's been some additional buzz on that effort. What's the latest there?
Well, on Friday, White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller said the administration is considering suspending due process to deport illegal immigrants.
Well, the Constitution is clear, and that, of course, is the supreme law of the land, that the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus can be suspended in a time of invasion. So I would say that's an option we're actively looking at.
In addition to Newark, there have also been protests in New York and Massachusetts, both over Trump's agenda and Baraka's arrest.
Boy, chaotic weekend on the immigration front for sure. Tim, thanks so much for reporting.
Thanks for having me on.
President Trump nominates Dr. Casey Means, a popular MAHA figure, as Surgeon General.
Here with more is Daily Wire reporter Amanda Prestigiacomo. So, Amanda, Trump has replaced his original nominee for Surgeon General, going instead with Dr. Casey Means. Who is his original pick and what's behind the switch?
Yeah, it definitely was sudden. Trump pulled Dr. Jeanette Neshiwat, his former nominee, just one day before she was scheduled to appear for confirmation hearings. Neshiwat was criticized by the MAHA crowd and conservatives for some of her advocacy during COVID, specifically on vaccines and masks. She also didn't seem to align with RFK in the MAHA space, so obviously some conservatives were just not thrilled about that nomination. Means, on the other hand, she seems like a much better fit. She advised RFK during his 2024 presidential run, and she reportedly helped broker Kennedy's endorsement of Trump. That was a huge moment for the Trump campaign.
Right. Well, listeners might remember she came on the show several months ago. So remind listeners of her credentials and her medical philosophy.
Yeah, Means is a Stanford University trained surgeon, and she's the author of Good Energy. That book discusses metabolic dysfunction and chronic illness. When she was at Stanford, she became disillusioned with how she saw medicine being practiced, especially when it came to chronic illness. She's a critic of big pharma and thinks Americans are way over-medicated, and she advocates for prevention and reversal of such diseases by addressing root causes like food, exercise, and environment. Here's Means in her own words speaking to Morning Wire.
As a physician, really at the top of my game, I graduated from Stanford Medical School. I went into a surgical residency. I'm looking at these stats and thinking, what is going on in American healthcare that is causing astronomical increases in chronic diseases that we know are tied to our diet, our environment, our lifestyle, and no one is talking about it. So that got me to really step back and reevaluate how I wanted to interact with the healthcare system. And what I realized is that while there's absolutely a place for surgeons when it comes to acute issues, we did not need one more head and neck surgeon drilling into sinuses and draining pus from ears. I really need to go out and actually address the bigger issue that is just plaguing Americans across the lifespan today, which is chronic diseases tied to food that are largely preventable and reversible and are not being talked about by the healthcare system.
Last note on Means, sort of unexpectedly, there was a lot of drama in the MAHA space over her nomination. Nicole Shanahan, who was RFK's 2024 running mate, she posted online that Kennedy promised that Means would never work for HHS. Shanahan went as far as to call Casey and her brother Kelly Means Manchurian assets. There's some speculation that Shanahan's frustration stems from Means apparently being too pro-vaccine. Kennedy actually weighed in on the drama, and he fully backed Means. Here's a direct quote. The Surgeon General is a symbol of moral authority who stands against the financial and institutional gravities that tend to corporatize medicine. Casey Means was born to hold this job.
Well, we're going to be keeping tabs on that confirmation process. Now, shifting gears a bit, there have been a few major food companies that have made changes that align with some of the MAHA agenda. What's going on there?
Yeah, let's start with PepsiCo. That's a big one. They make Pepsi, obviously, Mountain Dew, Gatorade, and they own the Frito-Lay brand. So that's products like Doritos, Lay's, and Sun Chips. The company's CEO, Ramon Laguarta, he said that he wants PepsiCo leading the way on some of these MAHA changes. He said that brands like Lay's and Tostitos, for example, they'll be rid of all artificial colors by the end of this year. So that puts them a whole year ahead of Kennedy's deadline on phasing out some of those dyes. Laguarta said that in the next couple of years, PepsiCo products will have all natural colors, or at least the option for consumers to choose from. We also have Tyson Foods accelerating MAHA changes. That company makes a lot of chicken products and frozen foods. CEO Donnie King said that Tyson will eliminate all synthetic dyes from its products by the end of this month. And to close things out, we have two more MAHA updates. We have Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida. Last week, he signed a bill that bans the addition of fluoride into the public water system. So following Utah's lead, Florida is now the second state in the nation to ban that chemical. And lastly, Secretary of Agriculture Brooke Rollins, she said last week that she's working to increase Americans' access to fresh, healthy foods by working with farmers. Rollins said that there's an effort underway to move more locally sourced foods into communities. She wants to make sure that we're providing the healthiest foods to our food banks and to our schools.
Well, some really great changes coming down the pike. Amanda, thanks for reporting.
You're welcome.
Thanks for waking up with us. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news you need to know.